Welcome, Reem Gaafar, to the Radical Futures podcast. I'm so excited to have you here to talk to you. You are joining me from somewhere on the east side of Canada, I believe. Is it Toronto?
London, Ontario.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks for coming. And for those who don't know, Reem, you are a writer of fiction and nonfiction, though you were trained as a public health physician. You're from Sudan and currently are in Ontario. And in 2023, you won the Island Prize for a debut novel from Africa. And this is a manuscript prize. And then your novel, A Mouthful of Salt, was then published by Saki Books in the UK last year. And now it's out with Invisible Publishing in Canada very recently. And we can talk a bit about your novel very soon, but I wanted to start by talking about Sudan. It's very hard not to think about this with now a 2-year war raging there and an extraordinary refugee crisis unfolding. And of course, the history of this conflict is so much longer. And I wanted to put you on the spot. One shouldn't put people in the spot like that, but to start by asking you to tell our listeners, to educate a little bit about what is happening in Sudan. I'm sure it's taking a toll on you and your loved ones. And the reason I ask this is because writers or people who are in the business of narrative and craft are so much better at distilling historical and political events. And I just wanted to hear your perspective on this.
Thank you, Bhakti, and thank you for having me here. I'm excited, and thank you for shedding light on what's going on in Sudan, because it's been going on. I mean, this particular issue started in 2023, but it spans way back, and it's very difficult to kind of put it in a small box or just identify one or two, roots from where this came. But the current war is not a civil war. Which is the way it's incorrectly labeled. It's a conflict between two armed groups, and it is backed by regional and international players, which is why it's been going on for so long now.
Yeah.
It should have burnt out right away, but because it's been very well funded.
Wow.
And it has caused huge suffering and displacement and death. It has left literally no one untouched. Sudan has had conflict forever, but it's usually localized in specific areas, specific regions. This is the one time where it just touches and has scorched everyone. It has completely destroyed infrastructure. If this war was to start today, it would take decades just to get back to where we were.
Mm-hmm.
All of our families are displaced. The lucky ones like me have been able to bring their displaced families to safety. Other people have not been so lucky. I have lots of family members still trapped there. We have lost family members along the way in different ways, either directly due to the fighting, either because of the destruction of healthcare facilities.
Thanks so much, Reem. Yes, I think it's really hard to encapsulate, of course, and there is a long history, as you are saying, I'm saying, and I really hope that there is some way to move forward soon. All these wars right now, it's all about the funding and the weapons and the exacerbation of old dynamics, old issues, with just the insanity with which the bombs and the weapons are being shared. It's really unimaginable. We are at an apocalyptic place, I think, in our time today. So let's talk a little bit about you. And before we get to talking about your book, so you are a physician. I've read that everywhere about you, but I haven't really heard you say a lot about it. I just wanted to know how come you got into doing that, and then when did you switch to writing, or getting interested in writing, or deciding I really must do this?
Actually, the writing came before everything else, really. I was always a writer because I've been writing since I was very young.
Mm-hmm.
First, I started with drawing and painting. That was my way of, not really expression. That was kind of my thing. But then I got into writing and I realized I really liked it. I think when I was 12, or 13. That's when I started writing a lot.
Yeah.
We had those very old windows. I should probably not say this because it shows how old I am. We had the very old windows and the mouse with the ball and those ginormous CPUs. And I had a floppy disk, which was pink. Um,
Hey.
so that's when I started writing, and I started writing a novel. And actually, when I think back on it now, that was actually a pretty good novel because by the time I lost it all, I was at chapter 7. um, so that's when I started writing. I was writing all through that, and then all through medical school. I started writing more during medical school because that was the first time I had lived in Sudan.
Hmm.
Um,
Was there family pressure to go to medical school to
not
take a profession like
not
that?
to go to medical school, but to finish medical school because by the time I was in my fourth year,
Hmm.
I decided it wasn't for me. Um, it was a very difficult, when I got to the clinical years where I go to the hospital and do the clinical rounds and see actual patients, and that was my first really smack in the face of all the suffering, and because we were working in public hospitals,
Hmm.
so the poverty and how we were all seeing late stages of disease everywhere. I there
Mm.
are there are these images that are just burnt into my head. I think the one that made me decide that I was going to quit was this child who had gangrene on both her arms and her legs, and they were going to cut them off at the elbows and at the knees. She
What?
had this very rare condition which caused this. So it's like she was wearing black gloves and black socks.
Hmm.
I remember that was the one that really got it for me. So I decided I was not going to do this.
Yeah.
And I remember this discussion very clearly. It was with my mom and with my brother, and I said, "I'm not doing this." And my mom's like, "What do you want to do?" My brother was asking me. I said, "I want to write books." And they're like, "You can write books, but you have to finish what you've started. So finish this, and then do whatever you want." And I did that. I finished medical school, and then I decided to do my internship, and then it starts to start my training because I was there
Hmm.
already, and this was my income. But I was writing a bit on the side. The more the dramatic and difficult my life became, the more I wrote.
Wow.
So when I mean, I did take publishing seriously, but I always thought I couldn't do it for a
Hmm.
very long time. So I have a lot of content in all my laptops and all my drives. I have a lot of different storage areas. Um,
Yeah.
there was a lot out there. So when I did finally write this book, it wasn't at all my first, and it
Hmm.
wasn't even. It was not at all. I can't say my best because I don't think any of my work is good. But this in particular was kind of a bit of an accident. I saw the Island Prize, and I decided I wanted to be a part of this competition because the Island Prize is it's not a big prize. It doesn't give you lots of money, but it gives you editorial support. And I wanted
Okay.
someone from the publishing world to look at my work and to just hold my hand through it. That's really what I wanted. So I just wanted to make the shortlist. I didn't even
Yeah.
care about the rest. And then
Yeah.
from there, I won and I got published and everything. That quite literally changed my life. That's when I was able to finally have my writer self as an actual person instead of
Yeah.
something that I just think about.
Yeah, that's a very inspiring story for everyone trapped in professions that that aren't fulfilling their soul.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the floppy disk accidents, and I
That
remember
was
I'm older
really
than
the
you,
first
so
of
it's a safe
many.
space.
Yeah, the first of many, many accidents.
Yeah, of course. And what about sort of mobility, like, living in Sudan, then living abroad? Has that shaped your experience as a writer, thinker? you know
Yeah, I have moved a lot. It has shaped me as a person, as
hmm.
in now all of this movement is quite jarring, honestly. Even though I've kind of moved in the same areas and then to Canada. So I
Hmm.
was in Oman with my parents, and then I moved to Sudan for medical school, and then I moved back to Oman to work, and then I moved back to Sudan to work again because I wanted to leave. That's when I left emergency medicine. I was an emergency medicine physician first,
Oh my
and
gosh.
then to public health. I wanted to
Hmm.
work for the civil service. And then I got married and I moved to the UAE. And then we decided to move to Canada because we wanted to pursue our educations.
Yeah.
Um, and even within medicine, I changed specializations, and then I changed. That meant that I changed, places where I worked. So lots and lots of moving around, which is very uncomfortable. It does affect you on the professional level because even though you gain a lot of experience and a lot of exposure, you lose that continuity. So you don't. I mean, if I had stayed in one profession in one place for just even half of this period, I would have reached, a consultancy level, which I haven't done so
Yeah.
yet. But at the same time, it makes you really resilient.
Mm.
It gives you a lot of experience on how to manage change.
Yeah.
And for me, I was quite lucky that I had switched from clinical practice to public health because that gave me a lot of flexibility on how to work, where to
Sure.
work. So any country I've gone to, I've been able to work immediately. I don't have to license because I'm not a practitioner anymore.
Okay.
So I can just jump right in anywhere. I can work remotely. That helped me a lot during COVID. A lot of people
Hmm.
lost their jobs. I didn't lose my job. I was actually working more because I was able to work from where I am. And then even moving to Canada, just bridging that gap between employment and until I started my PhD, I was able to work. I'm here in Canada and I'm working with the UK, and still some work back in Dubai, and I'm still
Hmm.
doing that every now and then.
Yeah.
So it gives you flexibility, and that kind of gives you just something to stand on.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of change, so you lose people along the way, kind of. So like,
Oh
I
gosh.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because I'm
Yeah.
someone.
Like worlds get built and vanished. You know.
Exactly, yeah, yeah. And when I'm one of those people who relies on my professional network and my place for friendship. So just losing that, moving every time, and coming and then
Yeah.
working remotely, you lose all of that. So you kind of end up a bit lonely.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm also hearing that seems like you can ride anywhere. Like you don't need that routine and that fixed place. Like you're able to adapt or something. Um,
Oh, maybe I don't know. That's not
it's
me.
possible.
Yeah, I don't have a routine for
Well.
writing anyway, so I just write whenever I can, not whenever I want to, whenever I
Mhm.
can. It comes in bursts. It's very chaotic. I wish I was an organized writer, but I'm not.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's interesting you're talking about the child with the gangrene and then moving from emergency medicine to public health and stuff like that. And now suddenly I'm thinking that your novel has a lot of kind of description that perhaps someone who has not been in your field may not have access to, about bodies, also about some of the animals in the village, and the stuff that starts to happen because this village, it turns out, is a bit cursed. So in a way you are using that knowledge into your writing, so your two vocations are not kind of fighting with each other, they are helping each other, or am I just kind of being live
Uh,
being
yeah, I
silly?
try. Yeah, it is a habit because I write a lot in the medical field in
Yeah.
science. I do research,
Mhm.
so that kind of imposes itself on my fiction writing, and this is a bit more recent now. It wasn't like that before,
Yeah.
and that was actually a challenge that I had. In that before, I could just write. I write very organically. I don't really. It's what they call a pantser. I just start writing and then it comes out. And I didn't really trust that process. That was kind of strange because I didn't see anyone else doing it. But then I didn't even know any other writers, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, and then so the older I got and the more experience I had with my other, with being in academia and in the science field, you kind of control your writing more. And
Mm.
that was actually keeping my writing back.
Yeah.
I remember the novel that I'm writing now. I was actually writing before
Yeah.
while I was working in Sudan, and I made great progress. But then I got tripped up. I was tripping myself up because I kept stopping and holding back and saying, "No, I shouldn't do it this way." And then let me focus on the research because it was about politics in the 50s and 60s, and I needed to read a lot. And then I
Yeah.
just got so tangled up, and I just stopped. So when I did A Mouthful of Salt, it was really quite an exercise for me to just trust my own process and keep
Hmm.
the medical and the science out of it. It still imposes. You can see that I can't help it.
Yeah.
I work with it.
It's
Yeah,
good. It's good. It's
yeah.
good.
I trimmed it down a lot during editing,
Yeah.
especially specific scenes which were highly medical. I had to keep rewriting them to make them look
Hmm.
to just get the medicine out of it as much as I could while maintaining accuracy about the parts that needed to be accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, actually, one
Okay.
of my drafts has footnotes with my references, and then we edited those out again.
That's funny.
Um,
Okay. Well, so to come to your novel, for those who haven't read, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, A Mouth Full of Salt. is, it has multiple stories, multiple perspectives, but it starts with the story of a young boy who drowns in the Nile. Not the first time a Sudanese writer has started with a drowning. There's Hamur Ziada, which is, the
Yeah.
book is called A Drowning, and it's set in the late 80s, and then it kind of goes a bit back and forth in time. And this is a village which it feels a bit cursed. There are strange things happening. There's bad luck, and some of it is also, you're harking back to the way perhaps racism has operated within Sudanese society, and there is some sort of reflection on the war today. How did you conceive of this particular kind of complex, fascinating story? I mean, it's a village, and of course there are all these kind of dynamics, and it's a great way to understand how people treat each other, class, race, all those things. But I just wanted to know how you kind of came to this structure.
The short and uncomfortable answer to that is that I didn't come to any. I didn't set out to do that at all.
Hmm.
Um, the idea was always about a child who dies while his parents are away. This is based on a real story that I heard. At that time, I always had an idea about the village, riding out the village, and so the child became a child who drowns because that's how people die in our villages, the villages that are along the side of the Nile.
Mm.
And there was Fatima, who was a girl who she's the one who we see. We're observing the story through her, and she comes with her own backstory. So that was always kind of the core around it, and there was always a mysterious person in this story. And it kind of stopped at that. This was actually a short story to start with, but then I kept on going back to this mysterious person and digging into that person, and then this person came to represent the other.
Mm.
And the other is always, someone that, wherever you come from, the other is always someone that you either fear or you despise or you look down on. There's always that divide. Whereas the other is always a person as well with their own background and their own culture and their own everything. And really, this is where racism comes from. It comes out of ignorance of this other, just treating them as that, and then wrapping them in superstition just to make yourself feel better. So that's kind of how it happened. I kept going deeper into that other person, and then it opened a whole other Pandora box, um, which I had to explore, on my own. It took me a while to get to that part. I was trying to kind of dodge around it, and then, I decided to just because that's the way it is. Really, you can only understand or come to terms with this other when you understand where they're from.
Yeah.
So that's how I came in, and then honestly, in Sudanese society, I mean, in all societies, people live side by side with different races and everything on a day to day basis. It doesn't really matter at all, but a systematic basis, it does. For
Hmm.
example, in our case in Sudan, for example, um, when Sudan and South Sudan were still one country, uh, South Sudanese people didn't really have that many opportunities for work in their careers in the north.
Yeah.
Um, and there was the undertone of racism at all levels. I mean, in a regular neighborhood, they'd be living side by side normally. That's fine, and they're friends and everything. That's it. But there's still that undertone there, and
Yeah.
then it manifests in these other more violent ways when it comes to conflict and to war. And then in the end, we had this secession where they decided to just become their own country and be
Yeah.
done with us. So that's something that we can't really escape. It's there, and people don't like talking about it. Uh,
Mm.
I didn't like writing about it. It makes everyone feel uncomfortable, but we can't deny that it's there. I mean, yeah.
Hey, it's your job as a writer, for us to make us face these uncomfortable topics. And it's interesting because your book is coming at a time when uh, there is a reckoning within Sudanese culture. I mean, I would say, another Sudanese writer, Fatima Abbas, has written about the history of slavery in Sudan. And then this film that had received a lot of acclaim called Goodbye Julia by Mohammad Kordofani is
Yeah.
also kind of dealing with questions of anti-black racism and the divide between the northern Arab and the southern, the southern Black Sudanese. So, do you feel that anti-black racism continues to play some sort of a part in the way this conflict is playing out, in the way it's not resolving? Like, you know, how do you think about this today?
It's interesting that you bring this up because I was also thinking there's also Leila Bolela's latest book, River Spirit, which also talks about
Yes,
North and South. And I'm trying to remember which other ones, but just maybe these are the most recent, and with Goodbye, Julia. Um, I was wondering why this is an issue because Sudanese people have maybe moved on from this ever since 2012. And now with this war, people are really unable to think of anything other than our own plight. People definitely do not want to think about what happened.
yeah, I want to say that there's a feeling of being moved on because South Sudan became
Yeah,
its independent
exactly.
nation
So
in
that's what it looks
2011.
like on the surface. But when you look at all of this work, people haven't moved on at all. I haven't moved on,
Yeah,
honestly. And I think, especially our generation on both sides in Sudan, because we were dealing with what happened with our past generations. We inherited this problem. And then it kind of tried to solve itself, but there was never really any healing at all. No one talks about this. I remember, if you remember that webinar we had with Mayada Ibrahim and Stella Gaetano,
absolutely.
yeah, I was really upset after that. I
Mm,
was so upset speaking with Stella about this, Stella from South Sudan. And I realized after that, this was probably the first time, at least to my knowledge, that there's been any kind of talk between a Sudanese and a South Sudanese, um, not author, but person in general, out
yeah.
in the open. And we didn't even touch the surface. We just, touched on it and on trauma. And just that mention was just so devastating. I almost cried.
I know.
Stella almost cried. It was very difficult. And I realized that we really did not do anything with this problem. It's just sitting there and festering.
Yeah.
And the fact that we in the North are now going through this war and we are experiencing what other people have been experiencing,
Mm,
maybe a lot more than before. But I mean, it's kind of our first taste of war, honestly.
yeah.
So it's entered all of our homes,
Absolutely.
and it does kind of make you reflect on what everything that's been going on in the past.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, I've seen the discourse. I've honestly stopped with social media. I'm only on Instagram now because I just can't take it anymore. Everything about the war is just
I
I'm so
know.
overwhelmed with it all. It's been 2.5 years and I just can't take it. So I focus only on Instagram for it's a bit more lighter. I
Yeah.
just listen to bits of news, but I don't. But before when I was still on social media, I could see the discourse. There's, you know, people just don't want to think about other people's conflicts, uh,
Yeah.
and they kind of when you mention anything, it's like you're like you deserve this because of what happened all that time ago with South Sudan, and that's not the way it is. It's just that this should make one reflect
Yeah.
on what other people are going through, and when these other people are telling you how much we're suffering and how much they've lost, you should have some compassion. It's not a These are not
Yeah.
separate things. This is all one long medium of suffering for everyone.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 No, I'm sure it was. I don't know what the social media discourse was, partially because I don't read or speak Arabic. But yeah, I think within the people who are in the know, I think it's generally the South Sudan question comes up as it's related to Hemeti and Darfur and all that kind of stuff. But this thing you're saying is so much more disturbing, this idea of a punishment for like past sins or something like that. And what's interesting, because you brought up Stella Gaetano, who's a brilliant writer, um, from South Sudan, but writes in Arabic. And one of the things that was always interesting about her is that she was always married to a northerner, and that was something that she would talk about, or it was part of her short stories. And there is something that the writers recently, I find, are doing with love, and it sounds cheesy, like, but there is some speculation through these stories on interracial relationships, and I'm mentioning here Ghost Season by Fatin Abbas, which has plot between a young black man, southern man named William,
Really, yeah.
and this house maid Layla, who's northern, who's Arab. And then in Leila Abu Leila's book, which is like set way back in the 19th century, it's the story of a slave girl who is in love with a northerner as well. And then your book also has a plot like that, though yours is not as romantic, and but it engages with the challenges of having interracial love. I mean, do you want to say why all of you have converged on this theme at the same time, and the novels are published within like few months from each other?
I really don't know. First of all, those two books are brilliant books. If people haven't read Ghost Season by Fatin Abbas or River Spirit by Leila Barada, you really should. I really enjoyed reading those books.
Yeah.
And I can't say I was influenced by them because I read them after I wrote my
Yes.
manuscript.
They came
But
at the same time, all of
yeah.
you.
And I honestly, I don't do romance at all. I don't even read romance. And so getting this particular issue into the book, as you mentioned, I don't really focus on it a lot. And also because for me, it wasn't really the focus at all, but it was a necessary thing that had to happen to make the rest of the story work.
Sure.
And there's something about this is probably maybe my explanation of this is that the biggest issue or the biggest manifestation of racism in our country is the marriage issue. Marriage is a huge. I think this is the same in India and lots of Eastern cultures.
Yeah.
Where marriage is based on, there are certain, like in India, there are the
Caste
the castes, and in
and
areas there are the
religion
tribes.
and
So,
class.
and class, yeah. So in Sudan and in lots of places, certain tribes don't marry from other tribes. And
I
this
just I just want to I just want to interrupt you right there and be like, let's not give the West any great credit. They have their own tribal
of
systems that
course, yeah.
operate perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same as it was like a white versus black or anything like that.
Totally.
Yeah. But in ours, because our cultural demarcations are much clearer than here,
Yeah.
it's easier to kind of describe it. Um, so the thing is that in Sudan, this is the biggest taboo, or no, this is the biggest. This is the worst thing you can do to cross that line. That's why I mentioned that people live side by side fine. There's no open conflicts between regular, people. It's not like they won't live next to each other or they won't talk to each other. They socialize very normally, but they don't marry from each other. That's the biggest thing. So for people to actually go ahead and do that, that's like the biggest. And this is such a complicated issue because it's not just about who you choose to marry. Marriages in our cultures are family to family. It's not just an individual person. You can't just choose who you want to marry and go and marry them. It doesn't work like that.
Sure.
And in Sudan in particular, there's a lot of, so if you decide to marry this person, the family gets involved and then they do all the research and they look on all the roots and who is this person related to and where did they come from, where do their families come from and where did they live and is there any inclination of their being from a specific area, etc. And if there's any even doubt about that, the whole thing is off.
Wow.
If they do go ahead with that, it would be a big issue. Even if the immediate family accepts, the extended family wouldn't. And even if they did and everything goes as fine, their children will be the ones who suffer. And that's what you see in interracial marriages in our countries. The kids are fine and they might be successful in anything. But for example, people who still hold those ideas won't marry them.
Yeah.
So it goes way, this is a very difficult decision to make.
Yep.
So for this thing to happen, I think maybe that's why we kind of, touched on that or maybe showed it in that way because of this, of how, complicated this particular part of it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the book touches on that with quite a few characters, actually. Hopefully, people will run and get it to know what we're talking about. I want to know why you chose to set the book in the late 80s. What were the historical events that you wanted as the backdrop? Or because a story of a village sometimes is kind of a universe in itself, it could apply to any time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But you chose this particular time. And there are references in and out. I don't, we
Yeah,
don't have to always catch and interrogate them, but I'm just sort of curious why that time.
yeah. It was a bit of a difficult decision because, as you mentioned, the village, and especially in Sudan, everything that's happening at this time could be happening today in Khartoum or just like a few kilometers out of Khartoum, because there are many areas have not progressed like a single day from the 60s. Um, but I wanted to avoid the uh, the Islamist government era completely, because that is a
Oh, I
whole
see.
other story on its own. The 1989 coup by Islamist Brotherhood, and um, everything that happened after it, all the way until the 2018-2019 Popular Revolution, that is a
Mm,
black hole in Sudanese history. And this is why people know nothing about Sudan in recent history, because of that isolation and everything that happened inside Sudan since this government or previous government took hold. And so that's why it's set at a very specific time. It's after the floods of 1988 and before the coup of 1989. So it's in the early spring, summer of 1989. Just because anything after that would have had a, a, a layer over everything. Everything that happened after 1989, has been greatly influenced, especially in the peripheries, by the Islamist regime. Not the Muslim regime, the Islamist regime, was in these people who
yes.
came and were, governing in the name of Islam, and it was nothing to do with that.
Hmm.
So I kind of wanted to avoid all of that. Also, at that time, Sudan was kind of on a brink. It was going through a lot. It was one of the few times where it had a democratic government, democratic elected government. We've had three of those, and those were only a few years because the army keeps on coming and taking power again. But it was also going through a very difficult time. There were shortages of everything, and the peripheries, the rural areas in particular, were suffering the most in this. So the story is kind of set at a time where people are expecting and they're suffering and they're trying to hustle, and so much is happening at the same time, but it's happening because of the current situation.
Hmm.
Um, and that's where my main character, or who used to be my main character, Fatima, is at that time. So because
Yeah.
she's also entering adulthood, and she's also, she
Yeah.
needs to decide how, if she's going to, continue her education. She has her own thing going on there.
Hmm. How come you're writing fiction in English? And I've asked this, of course, to Leila Abu Leila as well. Um, and you know just because Arabic language writing from Sudan is massive amounts of writing, just a long incredible history. So I am almost certain you will also be able to write a novel in Arabic, but I just wanted to know a bit about the choice, and maybe you can say a little bit about how colonial history is a little bit different the way it plays out in Sudan. Like, how does that shape the language, or how did it work for you?
It's simply just a language barrier. My Arabic is terrible. It's not terrible, terrible. It's better, but
Yeah.
not enough for me to write in. Arabic is a very beautiful and very complicated language. I learned
Did
Arabic when I was 9.
you were
Um,
you in English medium school in
I was
Sudan?
in New Zealand. I grew up. My first part of my childhood was in New Zealand. My parents did their PhDs there,
Oh, I
and
see.
then we moved to South America, and then to the Middle East. But I only entered the Arabic. That's when my parents got a bit more desperate to make us learn Arabic. Was when I was in the 5th grade. We
Okay,
tried, less.
that's different from Leila Abu Leila, actually.
Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah.
I think she grew up in Sudan.
She grew up in Sudan, but in an like a convent,
Yeah,
like
she was
an
in, yeah,
English
she was
language convent school.
yeah, yeah. No, for me, I was in a kind of an English speaking environment.
Ah, okay.
And then we were introduced to Arabic eventually, and I speak Arabic, pretty well now.
Yeah,
But the main thing is that the reading, like the consumption of reading material, we read a lot in our
yeah,
childhood. My parents encouraged this a lot, and all up until now, and it was all in English. So it just became kind of easier, or it kind of it became like when I started writing my diary, I was writing in English. Everything I started writing was in English,
yeah.
just because that was the language that was available to me at the time. English is much easier to write and honestly, and easier to read. I only started reading Arabic
Yeah.
very late. Um,
Hmm.
Aside from the Quran, which is quite familiar already, but Arabic literature, I think I've read maybe a handful of Arabic books so far. It's just a bit more difficult for me to read. and also it's a very intimidating language. I actually tried translating this book on my own, and I didn't
Oh.
get past the first page, even though I used Google Translate for a part of it, and I was going through it again. But it's such a um, the language is very not everyone can express or can
Sure.
deal with it really. You can read maybe, but to write in it is a whole other story.
Mm-hmm.
I do hope that I could do that one day because I feel like I'm missing out on a lot,
Mm-hmm.
especially from the reading side.
Yeah.
But that's a
Yeah,
problem.
I feel you. I feel what you're saying as an Indian who grew up with two languages but was always in English
Yeah,
medium. It's like, ugh, I get so
yeah.
lazy.
Once your brain is wired to
I
switch off,
know.
it's very difficult. This is the problem that I'm facing with my children now as well.
Yeah.
Like the twins are already 7, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just becoming, it's a losing battle, especially unless they're immersed in an environment,
Mm-hmm.
which is what happened to us eventually. My parents moved us to Sudan and put us in Sudanese Arabic schools for a whole year. It was pretty awful, but it was the best thing that could have happened because we were completely immersed in this environment, and that's when we actually started speaking Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
It was enough to change the language that we speak in, but not enough to change the language that we prefer to read in or to write in.
Yeah. Did you have some experience of living in a village, or did you try to do some? Uh, did you try that out for your novel?
Our hometown is a village, a town, a village. I'd call it a village.
You modeled it on that?
Both of my parents come from two different areas, but they're a bit kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
So summer holidays, that's also a really good thing. My parents always took us back to Sudan for the summer holidays, and we always go to these different hometowns and visit our other relatives elsewhere.
Yeah.
So that's the general model, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in our area in the north, all villages and towns kind of look the same, or they have the same kind of general. You have the Nile and the great. Like we're one of the people who live along the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's family has lots of land there and gardens and all sorts of stuff over there. So um, generally, that's kind of it looks a bit similar to what's in the story. At least that
Mm-hmm.
was my kind of not the inspiration, but my kind of blue map
Yeah.
to that. The village is set elsewhere, but it's in the same general area. So that's as far as I could go.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
problem that I had when I was writing about South Sudan because I've never
Been.
visited there. I went to South Sudanese University, but it was in the north.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do a lot of work there, a lot of research
I see.
and
I see.
maps, and especially trying to visualize what it was like way back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. I'd speak with people. I spoke with my friends who spoke with their grandparents and their uncles and their aunts.
Amazing.
Um, yeah, there was a lot of work there. But for the
Yeah.
most part, I already had kind of an idea.
Mm-hmm. And coming from a sort of this is very academic kind of perspective, but to me, your book probably will get written about within the frame of eco-criticism, or the theme of like nature and humans kind of having a lack of sync, like things are not quite right. The drowning itself and the river and the role the river plays on that. There is a sort of epidemic where the animals become sick, and it's like it's like you're saying nature is very dangerous and that humans can't have any control over it. Like you're saying something. I don't know what you're saying. Maybe you can tell me.
Um, I would, I mean, I wouldn't, and I would use the word dangerous, particularly with the Nile,
Hmm.
because the Nile is a very, I mean, you have to actually see it to understand, and you have to see it in its different forms. Because on a good day, it's just a nice looking river flowing by, and people are going, watching the sunset and kayaking and doing all sorts of stuff. On a bad
Hmm.
day, it is terrifying,
Hmm.
um, and it can happen like that. That's the whole thing. It's just so unpredictable.
Yeah.
Not just with the drowning, but with his general behavior. Like if you have one night of excessive rainfall, I remember looking once when I was back in Khartoum and we were crossing one of the bridges, and usually you can see the Nile way down there, and there are these really old barges and restaurant barges and that. And then one time we were crossing, and then I was looking, and I found myself looking into the window of one of these barges, which is usually way down there, but the
Hmm.
water was so high. and this is so much water. I was like, this was just overnight. It was so high
Mm.
that it was lifting the barge to the same level as the as the as the bridge.
Wow.
I was looking inside at the tables on in the barge, um, and it was just so quick, and
Hmm.
it was dark and brown and muddy, and I was just wondering how many drowned people are in there. Like if
Oh
this
my
is here in
gosh.
Khartoum, what's it like way back or further up north?
Yeah.
It's completely unpredictable, and if you look at it at night, there's
Hmm.
nothing there. It's just complete blackness. You would have. I remember there was someone drowned. There were
Hmm.
children, three children, also in our family,
That's horrible.
from our extended family. This was when my grandmother passed away, and during the funeral, we heard that these children were missing, and so they were looking for them. And while they were looking for them, they were finding other people. They actually found a woman who had fell in 2 days ago, and she was holding on to something while they were looking for someone else.
Hmm.
There's always this issue of people, washing up or drifting along, and people find them and they hold on to them for a while, or they bury them, etc. So these are just the ones that you know of, and this has nothing to do with whether you can swim or you can't swim. It's just it's completely unpredictable, very
Yeah.
unreliable. You can't say that it's exactly as it is. The Nile gives us life, but it's not our friend. It has a
And it can take it away. Yeah, I know what you
it can
mean.
take it away. It can do whatever. So
Yeah. Well, I was in Khartoum for a very short time. I only saw the good Nile. It was so gorgeous and
yeah,
totally idyllic and beautiful, and the
beautiful.
Guti Island, and you know what I mean, all
Yeah.
the good version. But I see how it can, yeah, go bad. I just want to ask you one last question. Do you want to share what your future projects are? If you're working on a new novel?
Yeah, sure. I should be working on this novel, but I'm not at the moment. It's a work in progress. I finished the first
Mhm.
draft, and then I realized that it's missing so much, so I'm working on it again, or I should be.
Mhm.
Um, I'm working on the novel that I was working on before, and actually, part of it has been made into a short story and is published in an anthology called
Okay,
Relations Anthology, an anthology of African and diaspora voices.
wonderful.
And this is a story about, it's also a multi generational story about women freedom fighters in Sudan
Hmm.
dealing with different political events. Um, Back in the 60s and then all the way up to the current popular revolution in 2018, 2019. It just
Hmm.
talks about how people really move from the indifferent bystander to an actual part of the protest movement that would overthrow an entire government.
Amazing.
Yeah, and women's role in that, really.
Amazing. That's very exciting, and I hope we get to read it soon. Thank you so much, Reem,
I get
for
to write it.
joining me today.
Thank you for
It
having me.
will happen. You're doing it.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you so much. It was nice.
Thank you.